So in this Vipashyana retreat, we mentioned that we're going to be looking at the training going through these 5 points. First, to look at our current distorted view of reality, how that actually is the basis of our mental afflictions and suffering. Then we're going to look at how to establish the correct view of reality, and then how to meditate on that to bring it into our experience to start to overcome mental afflictions and sufferings, and also then how to integrate this into our daily life. So far then we've looked briefly at our current distorted view of reality, and we can see that there are at least 4 ways in which we distort the reality around us. We see things as quite stable when we in fact know they're not stable. We often tend to see our experiences in the nature of happiness, particularly our pleasant experiences. We see or believe that there is this autonomous self here, that there somehow seems to be a me here that's actually more than just the body and the mind. And we also tend to believe or see there's an independent me, independent world there. From a Buddhist perspective, these are all distorted views of reality. And by acting on this basis, we are out of sync with reality. That's what leads to our mental afflictions and suffering. And we saw that briefly in terms of these 6 steps, looking at the distorted view, believing there's a me here and an independent objective world there. And we saw how that leads to our mental afflictions and suffering. So what I'd like to do now for the rest of this evening's session is, before we have a look at how to establish the view of reality in terms of those 4 points tomorrow morning, is have a look at the broader picture in Buddhism, because we saw that already we have this word Vipashyana, which is the Sanskrit, and then there's also the Pali word Vipassana. So what we find within Buddhism is that there are a number of vehicles within the Buddhist spiritual path, and what I'd like to do is have a look at how the Vipassana practice fits within the different vehicles in Buddhism. And to do that, we're going to use your handout. You have there the 3 vehicles chart. So let's have a look at that now. So we have what's called nowadays called the Theravada vehicle. And the Theravada vehicle is based on the original Pali texts from the time of the Buddha, from his teachings, that then these Pali scriptures then is what spread into Sri Lanka, up through the northeast into Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and down into Southeast Asia. So all of those Buddhist traditions now come under the umbrella of the Theravada tradition. And in the Theravada tradition, the goal of the spiritual path is nirvana, which is personal liberation from suffering. And it's said that the state that we find ourselves in now, in Sanskrit, is called samsara, this cycle of existence in this unsatisfactory state, which we're going to look at a little bit more tomorrow morning. So this state of nirvana is personal liberation from suffering. And someone who's achieved this goal of nirvana is called an arhat. And arhat often translates into English as something like foe destroyer. someone who's destroyed the enemy. So who's the enemy that the Arhat has destroyed? Is the Arhat has destroyed this distorted view of reality and the mental afflictions. So by overcoming the distorted view of reality and the mental afflictions, then the Arhat, of course, has overcome all suffering and has achieved the goal of nirvana. Now, to strive for that goal of nirvana, we have to have the aspiration to strive for nirvana. And as we see in the chart here, that's most commonly translated into English as renunciation. But this is a classic example of how terminology can be confusing. And this is an example of where there's actually not a very good, it's not a very good translation into English. That the original Sanskrit word here was, or Pali word, was meaning the mind wishing to emerge from, the mind wishing to escape from samsara to liberation. So it actually means the mind intent on liberation. And that somehow got translated as renunciation, and that can be very misleading because this is really the entry point into the Buddhist spiritual path. So often we'll hear people say things like, if you really want to become a Buddhist and enter the Buddhist spiritual path, you have to develop renunciation. And then people see that word and they think, okay, I think that means if I want to be a Buddhist, I have to give up all my stuff and I have to go off and live in a cave somewhere. This is not the meaning. Because if we just give up all our stuff, we don't have developed this aspiration for nirvana. We've just given up our stuff. And then we are still craving for that stuff. And then we just get more in agitation. So renunciation, when you see that word renunciation in Buddhism, it simply really means the aspiration for liberation. Now, how to achieve that goal of liberation is again through the Vipashyana practice to overcome the distorted view of reality. And in the Theravada traditions, which are based on Pali, of course, Vipashyana is, the Pali word is Vipassana. So the Vipassana practice in Theravada is coming to realize what's called the 3 marks of existence, which we see here in that last column. So if you go to any Theravada Buddhist country or tradition and look at what they're doing when they say Vipassana practice, then Vipassana practice effectively means coming to realize these 3 marks of existence, which we see here listed as impermanence, suffering, and no self. So these are the 3 insights we are cultivating in the Theravada tradition. So Vipassana practice in Theravada means to realize impermanence, suffering, and no self. And if we go back to the distortions that we have in now, our distorted view, those 3 insights, of course, respectively, are overcoming the first 3 distorted views. Realizing impermanence helps us to overcome the distorted view that things are stable. The realization of suffering overcomes the distorted view that experiences are in the nature of happiness. And then the Vipassana practice of no self overcomes the distorted view of an autonomous self. So these 3 marks of existence overcome these 3 distorted views. So that's what we're, tomorrow morning when we start to look at how to establish the view, the correct view, and then meditate on that, we're going to start by looking at Vipassana practice within the Theravada traditions. We're going to look at these three insights to see what they really mean and how to go about developing or cultivating these three insights. So this is Vipassana practice as it's known within the Theravada traditions. Any questions on this?
I do have a question. It might seem a bit naive, but why does every understanding or observation have to result in such a negative feeling of suffering? Maybe I'm taking the literal word, but of course.
So something, what I missed the start of that.
Somehow that all your distortions create a sense that it's a suffering,
okay,
as opposed to perhaps a euphoria.
Right. Yeah. So again, this distortion leads to this, but remember, I briefly mentioned that this word suffering is actually translation of the word dukkha. And so this word suffering is not the same meaning as we understand the word suffering now. So I was going to wait till tomorrow morning to describe that, because this is another classic example of how terminology creates confusion. Exactly your point, is that this is what's called the first noble truth. It's the very first thing the Buddha taught, that our human existence is in the nature of dukkha. And so that's unfortunately most commonly translated now in English as suffering. So often you hear things like people say, according to Buddhism, all life is suffering. And then when we hear that, we go, ooh, that doesn't sound right. Exactly your point. So therefore, what we need to appreciate is when we see this context, this is not meaning what we normally associate with the word suffering. When we see the word, hear the word suffering, we automatically think some sort of unpleasant, painful physical or mental experience. Buddhism's not saying all life is just unpleasant, painful physical and mental experiences. What Buddhism's saying is that all life is dukkha. What that means is we're going to look at tomorrow morning. And really there is no word in English that has this precise meaning, because this is has a very wide meaning. But one, to avoid this confusion, sometimes people translate this not as suffering, but as unsatisfactory. So then if you hear that according to Buddhism, all life is unsatisfactory, then we think, I have to think about that. That might be true. Let's think about that. But even the word unsatisfactory is unsatisfactory when it comes to understanding the word dukkha. So we're going to attempt to understand what this means. But a brief answer to your question is, this word here includes all of our pleasant experiences. That is included here. So we're not saying distorted view of reality necessarily leads to some sort of unpleasant, painful experience. Sometimes a distorted view of reality can lead to a pleasant experience. That's also included in the meaning of the word dukkha. And then there's something deeper to understand about the word dukkha, which we'll leave till tomorrow. So does that answer your question?
Very much.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is a very common confusion. And again, the problem is terminology, that a lot of these original Sanskrit terms, there is no word in English that has the same precise meaning. So the translator's forced to pick a word that sort of approximates it, but then often that word has a lot of other meanings in our English language, and then there's mass confusion. So therefore, normally when I'm teaching these sorts of things, I always like to go back to the Sanskrit word and then define what that means. And then things are clear. Then we don't have this problem of translation terminology difficulties. Any other questions about that? Yes.
I'm also coming back to the 4 points again tomorrow, because I'm not sure I understand well the second one, this experiences in the nature of happiness.
Yeah, that's same thing as this dukkha.
Okay.
So we're going to look at these in a lot of detail, but to give you a brief answer, is experiences in the nature of happiness is that we often tend to now equate pleasant experiences with happiness. that those pleasant experiences are actually in the nature of happiness, and we grasp onto that. But the question is, are they really? Are our pleasant experiences in the nature of happiness? That's what we're going to look at tomorrow. And the Buddhist, of course, answer is no. And that's why we get into a lot of problems, because we have that false belief. And that's why actually we end up with a lot of suffering trying to grasp onto pleasant experiences. But we'll look at that in more detail tomorrow. Anything else here? Okay. What I'd like to do now then is move on to what's called the Mahayana tradition, or the Mahayana vehicle. And the Mahayana vehicle is coming from the original Sanskrit texts. And those original Sanskrit teachings that were written in Sanskrit from the Buddha, they sort of went from India up through the northwest of India originally, across the Himalayas onto the Silk Route, and then they went into China, Korea, Japan, down to Vietnam, and then they went over the Himalayas again into Tibet. So all those Buddhist traditions, Chinese, Zen, Korean, Vietnamese, Tibetan, they all belong to the Mahayana vehicle. In the Mahayana vehicle, the goal of the spiritual path is enlightenment. And in the Mahayana vehicle, the assertion, of course, is that enlightenment is not the same as nirvana, that nirvana is a stepping stone to enlightenment, and that when we go on to achieve enlightenment, of course, we are called Buddha. A fully awakened one. And we're going to look at tomorrow, or maybe Sunday, probably Sunday actually, we're going to look at what's sort of the difference between nirvana and enlightenment, and how do we get from nirvana to enlightenment. That's going to be something we're going to look at on Sunday. Now, to strive for this goal of enlightenment, we have to have the aspiration for enlightenment first. So that aspiration in Sanskrit is called bodhicitta. Chitta, it means mind. Bodhi means enlightenment. So bodhicitta is the mind of enlightenment. So it's the mind which aspires to enlightenment. Why are we aspiring to enlightenment? So that we can not only liberate ourselves from samsara, from suffering, but we can help to liberate everyone else as well. Because in a fully awakened state of being in a fully enlightened state of Buddha, we can be most effective in helping others. Someone who's developed this aspiration of bodhicitta is called bodhisattva. So again, bodhi means enlightenment. Sattva has many meanings. Here it means courage or strength. So a bodhisattva is someone who has the courage or strength to strive for enlightenment. So once we develop this aspiration of bodhicitta, we will be called a bodhisattva. Then we follow the Mahayana path to enlightenment. When we achieve enlightenment, that bodhisattva becomes Buddha. How do we achieve enlightenment? Again, we need to get rid of this fundamental ignorance. And here in the Mahayana tradition, when we talk about the wisdom or Vipashyana practice, we're primarily talking about this wisdom of emptiness. In Sanskrit, shunyata. So this wisdom of emptiness is to overcome the fourth distortion that we had earlier, this one here. Because emptiness, that realization of emptiness, is a realization that there's no independent me, no independent world. So that's what emptiness means, that everything's empty of being independent. So therefore, when you go to any Mahayana tradition, such as Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese, Zen, Korean, Vietnamese, and you ask about Vipashyana practice, normally they'll be explaining how to practice this wisdom of emptiness, how to come to realize there's no independent me, no independent world, that actually nothing exists independently. Of course, in the Mahayana vehicle, as a basis for that, we would develop those wisdoms as well. So they actually also are the basis of this, because if we can realize these, then we have a very effective basis for developing this wisdom of emptiness. And we'll also see tomorrow morning how this is an effective basis for this. So this is the Mahayana vehicle. Any questions about that?
In the Theravada tradition, when they talk of emptiness, would that be the same as the emptiness of the Mahayana tradition?
Generally in Theravada, they don't use the word emptiness. Generally, you won't see that. They talk about selflessness, no self is the most common. Yeah, you won't really see this word emptiness so much.
Because I have seen it, and I have seen teachings on it, but then I was made aware that the subtle differences are there, but they're in fact catastrophically separate.
Yeah,
which is why we shouldn't stay on.
So when you say you've seen teachings in it, were they teaching shunyata, or were they using the English word emptiness?
Emptiness, yeah.
So we have to look at what that was, the translation in the Pali.
Right.
Perhaps not shunyata,
Exactly.
I think. So perhaps they're using emptiness in this respect somehow, maybe. I mean, within the Mahayana, often you'll find they use the word emptiness and selflessness often interchangeably, and often they can mean the same thing. So again, you have to be very careful about terminology. As you said, is that just because one tradition is using the word selflessness or emptiness, we shouldn't assume that that means the same as what we've been looking at. So again, terminology, we have to be very careful, because even within the Mahayana traditions, you have different philosophical schools, and most of them use these words selflessness and emptiness, but they have often very different meanings. So maybe that's what you're referring to. Yeah, more than in the Theravada traditions, because there's certain philosophical schools that are the basis of the Theravada tradition, and in those philosophical schools, then you'll see these words used, and they have quite different meanings. So we have to be very careful with that. So I'm going to try to be clear about the usage of these terms on the weekend to avoid this confusion. Anything else anyone would like to ask about this?
I just would like to continue from that. There, because I was attending a Vipashyana retreat in Thailand,
Right.
A year ago, and the way they were, the meditation in itself, to me, it was very similar to the Mahayana shamatha, very similar.
Right. So one thing we have to be careful again is the terminology. So like one of the most common Vipassana retreats you see in many countries is the Goenka Vipassana retreat, 10-day retreat. So you would think, because it's called a Vipassana retreat, you think, well, okay, then I'm doing Vipassana. But actually, and I've done this retreat a number of times, the first 4 days, there's no Vipassana, zero. It's all shamatha, because it's anapanasati. It's focusing on your breath here. So the first 4 days of that retreat, there's no Vipassana, it's shamatha. It's just concentrating the mind. Then the next 5 days is Vipassana. And in that Goenka retreat, which is coming from the Burmese tradition, which of course is part of Theravada, because it's an introductory retreat, the Vipassana practice, there's not really any of this. It's just this one that they're focusing on. So in the Goenka retreat, for 5 days, you're just scanning the body, noticing sensations, noticing them arise and pass, arise and pass, arise and pass. So you are experientially seeing that the body is impermanent. That's all you do for 5 days in that Goenka retreat. So even though it's called a 10-day Vipassana retreat, first 4 days no Vipassana, and then the 5 days after that it's Vipassana, but only really this, none of these explicitly. Yeah. So again, you know, we have to be careful when things are labeled what's actually going on. So maybe I've not done the Thai one, but maybe it's something similar.
Well, actually, it was more like concentrating on your breath first, and then actually on your mind. And just.
Well, that sounds like shamatha.
Yeah, it's very similar to shamatha, at least what I've just done with you.
Yeah. Of course, shamatha is the basis of Vipassana. So you could say, well, we're doing the basis for Vipassana here. Anything else anyone would like to bring up? Okay, I want to add just briefly the third vehicle here, just to clarify a few points. So the third vehicle we see is called Vajrayana. Vajrayana, or sometimes called Tantra, as a vehicle, has the same goal as Mahayana. So Tantra or Vajrayana in Buddhism is striving for the goal of enlightenment. And of course, we need to develop the aspiration of bodhicitta. And to achieve the goal of enlightenment, we are developing the same Vipashyana practice of emptiness. So in those three respects, they're similar. What is, of course, different between Mahayana and Vajrayana or Tantra is the level of mind that we are using in the practice. In Mahayana and Theravada, we are using the coarse mind, the mind we have now. We are trying to first subdue that through the shamatha practice to make our coarse mind calm, clear, focused. And then on that basis of a calm, clear, focused mind, we use that in our Vipassana practice to come to realize either the three marks of existence or emptiness, and then slowly wipe out ignorance and mental afflictions, and then achieve the goal of nirvana or enlightenment. In the Tantra or Vajrayana vehicle, there are practices that help us to gain access to the deepest level of our mind, sometimes called clear light mind, sometimes called primordial mind, given many different names. And so through those practices, we gain access to that most subtle level of our mind, and we use that to realize emptiness, the nature of reality, and thereby we can accelerate the spiritual path to enlightenment. So it's the same emptiness that's being realized, but it's being realized by a much deeper level of the mind, this what's called clear light mind or primordial mind, or given many different names.
It's another word for Mahamudra.
So Mahamudra is talking about, in our Vipassana practice, of course, Mahamudra is talking about realizing emptiness because it's part of Mahayana. Mahamudra is realizing the nature of reality by focusing on the mind. So in Mahamudra practice, we are focusing on the mind to come to realize the nature of the mind. So often Mahamudra and Dzogchen, similar, is called nature of the mind practice. And we can realize the nature of the mind at both levels.
But Mahamudra, then you meditate on the awareness itself. You identify with the awareness, not, as you mean, you meditate on the awareness itself, on the basic space, on the primordial openness.
Right, but of course at our level, we don't immediately have access to that.
No.
So when we start Mahamudra practice, we are operating at this level. And then hopefully through the techniques that are given there, various techniques, we can turn it into Vajrayana.
Yeah.
So we can have often what's called Sutra Mahamudra, which is operating at this level, or Tantra Mahamudra, which is operating at this level. But Mahamudra can be at both levels.
Yeah.
But the thing with Mahamudra is that we are focusing on the mind itself as
Yeah.
the object of Vipassana practice.
Yeah, it's no witness. It is no witness.
It's no.
It's a no witness. It's
Yeah.
no witness. It's not a conscious witness. It's not a metacognitive thing.
Because in any practice, of course, emptiness means non-duality. So, of course, then when we're experiencing the nature of the mind, we're not witnessing it. That's a dualistic practice.
Non-conceptual.
Yeah, of course. And that non-conceptual experience can be at both levels, of course.
So the practice of Dzogchen
Of?
the Dzogchen?
Dzogchen.
Yeah.
So Dzogchen is this level. And sometimes in Dzogchen and Mahamudra traditions, they add another level on top of this one. But I won't go into that. But that's in terms of, because in the Vajrayana or Tantra level of practice, we have very specific practices that are sort of mentioned here, this generation completion stage practice, to help us to gain access to the most subtle level of our mind. Whereas there's sometimes even mentioned another level where, for particularly sharp faculty trainees, they can, in theory, gain access to those much subtle level of mind through simply what's called pointing out instructions, that the master just says a few words and then boom, they can get into that level of mind. Very difficult to do, but that is a possibility. And that's often then put as a sort of a next level. But the reality, of course, is that that sounds very attractive to us Westerners, whereas these levels of practice, we look at them and go, oof, that's a lot of hard work. That's not for me. But this pointing out instruction in Dzogchen Mahamudra, oh, that sounds really interesting. That's for me. And of course, then people sit there and they get these little instructions and they go, oh, yes, I'm realizing the nature of my mind. And all they're doing is spacing out because they're not suitable vessel for these types of instructions. What we can understand from these levels is that each one is the basis for the next level. And so if we're not at this level, then trying to use those instructions is just wasting our time. We need to backtrack to whatever level works for us, and then on that basis, move to the next level of practice, whether we're doing Dzogchen, Mahamudra, or whatever. Because if you look at particularly Dzogchen, Mahamudra, they will have all of these levels of practice in them, in fact. But of course, Westerners look at these other levels and they go, oh, no, too much work. I don't want to do that.
But it's really a matter of if you're walking the path, or if you penetrate it just straight, right? You always have the possibility to make a penetration just
right. But if you read the fine print, it says to be able to do that, you need to put a bit of work in first. That most people don't have the necessary basis to penetrate straight because our mind is full of mental afflictions. We're not focused. There are so many things that are stopping us from penetrating directly. So therefore, they often say, and the Mahamudra Dzogchen say, oh, you can't do that? Well, first you need to do this. Why you can't do that? Oh, before that, you need to do this. So then, of course, we have all these numdros and all these other practices that provide the foundation to clear the space to be able to penetrate directly. But of course, we Westerners don't hear that. And we just go, oh, I just want to penetrate straight. Just give me that. I don't want all that other stuff. That's too much work. And then, of course, it don't go anywhere. So,
and of course, we have the use of recreational drugs, which in a way open the doors, but it's momentary, and then you can't realize it. Actually,
you don't. Yeah, that's right, because you don't have a stable base.
No, there's
That's
no
That's right.
path. In fact,
Yeah.
But if you see it as like levels that you have to go through in order to get to the last part, I have never gotten any teachings from the Theravada tradition, but is it true? Does it stop, or do they go?
Yeah. So when I say it's levels, that doesn't mean we have to go and find a Theravada tradition first, because all of these practices here are in the Mahayana.
Yeah, I get that, but it could then sound like if at the people who practice the Theravada Buddhism actually stop at a certain level.
So, see, what we have to distinguish is between the philosophical tenets of a system and the people practicing. They're two different things.
Yes.
So even though maybe you're following these practices and that, as a practitioner, you may be able to go deeper.
Yes.
And the Mahayana assertion is that if you look closely in the texts, there is these teachings there anyway. Maybe not so obvious.
Yes.
Okay.
Just
Yeah.
thought was related to what the previous point was, that perhaps we normal people also have the ability to taste the subtle mind, to taste experiences of true emptiness, but it's so momentary, we can't in fact build on that experience.
Yeah, and that's what often sometimes you do. What happens is that you get some great master in these traditions, and they will try and give the people a taste to inspire them. But then they'll say, oh, you want to stabilize that? Okay, now you need to do this, this, and this, and this. And then people are more likely to put the work in because they know that they've tasted a little bit what's to come. So like even like Lama Yeshe, who's the founder of this FPMT in the 70s, when he was in Kathmandu, there was lots of hippies there doing acid and LSD and all that. And to try and get them out of that, he introduced this tumo, which is a high-level practice, and basically is to create bliss by focusing in the navel area. So he introduced this to them so they could get a little bit of taste of bliss, so that they wouldn't need to take acid or LSD to get the bliss. They could do it through meditation. So he gave that, and then they got interested, and then he said, oh, okay, now do this, this, and this, and then you can stabilize that. So you sort of hook them in that way.
So we can actually also trust that. We can trust our intuitive realization that we might have tasted it, that we can actually believe that, yes, that was it, and now we come back to the teachings.
Well, also there we have to be a little bit careful, because if we don't have a framework to start with and we have some experience, it's often difficult to interpret that experience. I mean, we could just be spacing out. So you get a lot of people through drugs or other means have some sort of experience, but then often they interpret that as some high-level experience, and even worse, think that they're far advanced on the spiritual path, and they're just completely deluding themselves. So, it's then helpful to have a qualified teacher who you can relate to, and if you have some sort of experience, you can explain, and then they'll probably more easily say, well, that was some little taste, or no, you were just spacing out, forget about that. That's not valid what you had. That was just nothing. So that's why if we're sort of going that route, really having a qualified teacher is very important. So in these sort of traditions that rely a little bit on this, like the Dzogchen Mahamudra, you'll find for those practices to really be effective require this very close disciple-teacher relationship, because it's really important to be able to guide the disciple very clearly when we're trying to use these sorts of approaches. Otherwise, people just get completely deluded into what's happening, and it not very pleasant. So that's very important. Okay. What I'd like to do now to finish is to do a little short meditation for 10 or 15 minutes. And I'd like to do what I've been doing last week, and that is to meditate in the corpse posture, the Shavasana posture, as a method for calming the body and mind, and also then that's something you can do at home. So find yourself some space. So corpse posture, of course, is lying flat on your back, your hands by your side, your legs a little bit apart.
Question about the eyes? in Savasana?
The Shavasana, of course, if you're using it as a method for transitioning to sleep, then you can have them closed. If you're using it as actually a meditation, proper meditation, then the general recommendation, again, have them slightly open, or if you're using that posture for any of the practices of observing the mind, to have them open. So you choose. Maybe we can switch off some of the lights again so there's not too much heavy lights. Also, you might like to have a little cushion under your head as well. That might be helpful. So spread out, there's some space at the back. So this corpse posture, Shavasana posture, can be very helpful in a number of cases. One, of course, is if we have some back problems and we can't meditate sitting upright, then of course this would be a very good alternative for your normal meditation practice. Or on a particular day, maybe you're feeling a bit sick and it's too hard to sit upright. So again, if you're feeling a bit ill, then you can meditate lying down. Also, of course, if you want to meditate in the evening, but you're physically very tired, then, of course, a very good option is to meditate lying down. And then, of course, also we can use this posture as a transition to sleep, to lie down on the bed at the end of the day and focus on the sensations of the breathing, relaxing, releasing any tightness or tension as a transition to sleep. And then do that as long as we can maintain some alertness, and then move out of that posture into whatever sleeping posture you normally adopt. So this evening we're going to just do this practice to get familiar with using the Shavasana as a meditation posture and emphasizing particularly relaxation. As an act of loving kindness for yourself, let go of any external distractions and allow your awareness to descend into the body, right down to the ground, becoming aware of sensations where your body is touching the floor or cushion. And then allow your awareness to fill the entire space of your body, becoming aware of sensations throughout the body. And using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Bringing your awareness to the area of your face, And softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. Mouth and jaw soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes soft and relaxed. And relaxing more deeply with every out-breath. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And with every out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Simply focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Wherever you most easily notice sensations associated with the breathing. And maintaining that ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. becoming dull or spaced out, then use the in-breath as an opportunity to arouse and refresh your focus on the breath. And to help overcome agitation or distraction, we can use the out-breath as an opportunity to relax, release any distractions, and very gently return to focusing on the breath. Now to come out of the Shavasana posture, it's very helpful to bend the left knee, to slowly then roll over onto your right side. And then in your own time, use both hands to help push yourself to a seated upright position. So that's it for this evening. So have a nice evening. We'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you.